Hello, everyone, and welcome to Client Feedback 101, an introduction for teams who are just getting started with client feedback. Just a reminder before we begin to stay muted and off camera. I'm very happy to introduce Kyle Couch. Hello, Kyle.
Morning, Arlene.
Morning. So, Kyle is founder and CEO of Spectrum, and he's going to be leading you through today's session. So, take it away, Kyle.
Thanks, Arlene. All right, morning, everybody. It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood. I hope you guys all had an opportunity to get your sidewalks shoveled and everyone's safe and sound and then cozied up. We're going to be at this for the next 2 hours or so. So for the most part, you're going to be off camera. So by all means, just sit back and relax. I've got some fun things to talk about in and around client feedback. So I'm going to be talking a lot. We're going to do a couple breakouts today, and we're going to wrap the session up with a couple things. First of all, there's going to be a long Q&A. And second of all, there's going to be a client feedback form as we're talking client feedback. So at the end, hopefully you can provide some feedback on today's session and let me know what you think. Let the service excellence team know what you think as well. So the other thing is that there is a chat feature. So if I'm speaking too quickly or there are concepts you want me to kind of pause and expand on at any point throughout the session, by all means, put some questions or content or whatever it is in the chat feature, so I know to kind of pause, rewind, whatever you need from there as well. We're going to be doing a couple breakout sessions, so you'll get a chance to interact with each other and talk about some pretty interesting concepts. But all in all, I'm hoping in the next hour and 20 minutes, we can sorry, hour and 20 minutes, 120 minutes. We can talk about some pretty exciting things around client feedback, which is kind of pretty near and dear to my heart. So what I want to do is I'm going to start off pretty easily here. We're going to do a bit of a poll because I want to make sure you guys kind of can give me some initial feedback on what you think about this whole the whole client feedback piece is. So I've launched a poll now. I'm hoping you guys can take a couple seconds just as we get going here to kind of give me an idea on what you think feedback is. So take a moment and fire away. Wow. Did we expect this? I'm going to share some results with you guys. A useful tool is a great response. Hopefully you're not just appling for the teacher right away, but the idea is that the overwhelming majority of you see it as a useful tool, which is great. Obviously, I appreciate the candor from some of you talking about it being intimidating. Those of you having done a lot of feedback in my lifetime, understanding it, yes, it is a lot more work, but I believe it is extremely beneficial once you get into it. And for those of you who see it as exciting, I'm very excited to know that. So that's a great thing to start off with. So I appreciate the feedback. It is a useful tool, and that's how I want to kind of structure the rest of today. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of go back and we're going to go through some slides. I want to talk about how I see feedback, and we'll go from there. So obviously, go through a couple of these pieces here. I've been doing this whole feedback gig for about 20 years now, and the more I say that, the more I'm kind of getting comfortable in my skin saying 20 years. But the idea is I've been in the HR space. I've been on the marketing side of most businesses outside of obviously boards, doing things like employee surveys, customer surveys. I've done a lot of things around 360-degree feedback, exit interviews, franchise surveys. So I've been asking questions for a very, very long time. And I see how much benefit this brings my clients and organizations such as TDSB. So I'm really excited to hear that a lot of these service teams are moving ahead into the feedback space. And I'm going to hopefully over the next, like I said, 2 hours, explain to you kind of where the state of the nation is on it, some tools you can use to get this sort of feedback in. And then at the end of the day, what are we going to do about it? So that brings me to what is today's session all about? And for a long time, organizations had a service or a product that they offered to their customers and clients, and they did so in a vacuum. They realized that they always believed, oh, we have a great product or we deliver our service better than anybody on the planet. They would send it off into the business or public space and assume it was doing a good job. And more businesses are realizing that that isn't in fact the case. That without feedback, you're doing it in a vacuum and you have no idea if you're hitting the mark or hitting the mark to the degree you could be. So more and more organizations are moving to this new model. So today we're going to hopefully show you how using feedback puts you on the map. And then for those of you who know, there is another session tomorrow, and we're going to talk about taking kind of feedback to the next level. For those of the groups that have already done this, what does it look like when you kind of go from the initial stages to a more advanced view on how feedback is? And that's more GPS. So once you figure out where you are on the map, it's then deciding where do you want to go and how are you going to get there. So as you go further and further into your feedback journey, that's going to be a really critical piece. So today's agenda is three main focus areas. First of all, we're going to talk about how to embrace feedback, because as though most of you said that it is a useful tool, many organizations and many groups around the world have been trying to get into the feedback piece, but they can't quite understand how to kind of wrap their head around it, around the emotional and kind of more societal pieces of it, the fear of it in some cases. We're going to talk about some things around, obviously, how do you collect feedback? So I'm going to talk about some different methods for collecting feedback, some ways to how to write more effective questions or statements to get the kind of the information you need from your clients. And then we're going to wrap it up talking about what do you do now? You have this big mountain of feedback from all these people, and how do we build an action plan around it? And what do we do to ensure that the rest of our service team understands what we can do to kind of make the change we need, because that's kind of the whole point of this whole feedback process. So let's get into it, starting with kind of embracing the feedback concept. And like I said a couple minutes ago, is that more and more organizations are getting into this feedback game. So understanding, you can't go to many stores these days without, as they hand you your receipt at the end, kind of they take their pen and they always say, fill out this survey at the end and you can win $1,000 gift card or those sorts of things. And understanding that is kind of more and more. Oh, someone's coming in, someone's late. Glad you made it. That more and more organizations, again, are tired of doing things in a vacuum. And I've said to many, many clients over the years that guessing is a terrible way to run a business. So if you're just guessing day to day that you're doing a great job, that's kind of an old dated view. Understanding you want to speak to the people that you're trying to serve in this case, and understand what do they need, how are you delivering what it is you do, and are you actually hitting the mark, and could you make improvements? So more and more organizations are understanding the power and benefit of feedback that they have, and understanding that there are two feedback streams. What we're going to talk about primarily today is the concept of solicited feedback. So what you're going to be doing around engaging your client group and asking them to give you feedback through a variety of means. But there's also this other piece where you get a phone call when you're least expecting it, or you get an email from somebody out there in the land that you serve, and they're giving you feedback, and you weren't ready for it, and you didn't understand it was going to be there. And I'm going to guess that if you haven't been doing feedback to this point, you're getting more of the unsolicited feedback, where people all of a sudden are calling in a complaint, or all of a sudden calling in unbelievably frustrated with what you've been doing to serve them day in and day out. And what we want to do is move to a more solicited feedback model, where you're asking for feedback, you're kind of allowing people to kind of vent or get their initial reactions out, and then make it a more consistent process for them to kind of give you the feedback and on how you're doing day in and day out. So I understand there's going to be unsolicited feedback coming more and more, and the idea is to kind of control the narrative a bit more by giving people kind of that route to give you information in order to make to raise your game on service excellence. So that's going to be a critical piece here. Another thing that's happening more and more in business is that there's this concept out there around customer-driven influence, understanding, and we've heard a lot about cancel culture and those sorts of things that organizations for the longest time, because they had the product, they had the service, they controlled things in one way or another. But now more and more organizations are understanding that the customer at the end of the day has more power. There are options, there's a global environment, and customers are realizing how powerful they are. So your clients, will start to understand that they can wield a bit of power. They can ask for things that they may not have asked for in the past. And as a service team, it's incumbent upon you to kind of look at that and say, gosh, that makes a lot of sense. Because we may think we're the smartest kids in the room, but it turns out that our customers and our clients rather need different things from us. So understanding that they control a bit more power, as you get more feedback, and you'll understand, for example, that they can help you get better. not just what you come up with, but they can come up with some great ideas for you in the future as you go along. Now, here's another thing, because a lot of these feedback processes that you're going to be developing in the next little while are internal and internal only. A lot of organizations, have maybe been reaching out to their customers externally for a very long time, and are more and more starting to realize that their internal client groups are just as important in terms of getting feedback from them. For a long time, because there was a lack of options. We're the IT group, we're the only IT group, so you're not going to go anywhere else. It's not like you're going to bring in another IT group or go out and find one. You have us, for example, and we don't have to ask you what you think because we're the only game in town. And while assuming everyone's working in their best to their best potential to serve their clients, that's a great thing. But some organizations, their internal groups, kind of take their foot off the gas a bit to understand that there's nowhere else to go. We're the only accounting department, we're the only HR, so we don't need to ask for feedback. But great organizations are understanding we want to serve internal customers to the same degree as we serve our external customers. So more and more options for getting feedback, improving what it is you're doing, and ensuring that your organization, in this case, obviously the TSP, grows and becomes world class in every aspect of its business. And I talked a lot with my customers about benchmarking your internal groups to external customers. So you ask a lot of organizations, oh, who's an organization you look up to, or who's great in your industry, and they can point to a variety of organizations as a whole. But when I ask them to drill down a bit and say, let's talk about your department in particular. Let's say you're in HR. What organizations have great HR functions? And that's where people are stumped. They don't have a best practice to look at in a lot of cases. So having feedback allows a lot of internal groups to develop best practices by involving people outside of the organization, i.e. their client group. So this is so important for the betterment of the TDSB, and I'm really excited to hear that this is becoming a bigger and bigger role for each of the internal service teams as we go along. Now, when you think about feedback, I'm sure most of you think right out of the gate, it's going to be a complaint system. It's going to be people that are just going to complain, they're going to call, they're going to write, they're going to email, they're going to telephone, whatever it is, they're going to just complain about things. And that's where a lot of people hold back on launching feedback initiatives, realizing that I don't just want to listen to complaints all day. I don't want people just kind of telling me I don't do a good enough job at what it is I've been trying to do for decades. So I want you to understand that the feedback comes in a variety of different forms. So from a positive perspective, let's say right out of the gate, you're going to get some compliments. If you have done great work, you're going to get people that are going to give you compliments, that are going to praise you for doing great work. So when you solicit feedback from your clients, your hope is that you're going to get some compliments, and that's obviously one of the number one things you're looking for. On the same token, obviously there are going to be some complaints that happen, and this is a great learning tool to get. You may have never known some of these complaints were out there, and so for the first time ever, someone is going to say, I don't like the color scheme. Like anything as silly as that. If that helps your external clients engage with you better or utilize your service more effectively, you want those complaints. You want to get some feedback from people that may not be positive, but allows you to grow and understand where some of your gaps are as you go along. Then there are going to be just some comments. People are going to say, my laptop arrived on time, or when I purchased that new thing, purchasing, send me an invoice an appropriate time. It's not a compliment, it's not necessarily a complaint, it's just kind of a neutral statement, but sometimes those can give you great pieces of information as well. So at a very high level, from people you don't necessarily know day in and day out, those are the three major components of feedback you're going to be receiving when you go in here. So I can almost argue 2 out of 3 are positive, and then there's going to be some complaints in the middle. But it's, if you're going to ask for feedback, complaints are a good thing. It's a positive. Now, what we're going to realize is that over time, you're going to start to identify some of your kind of super users or people that are kind of engaged with you more and more often, and you're going to be able to ask them for some different levels of feedback. So over time, like for those first 3 boxes, you're going to get some some kind of feedback from people you don't know very well. But as you get to know people a bit better, you're going to get people who are going to raise some concerns. So while the top three boxes are more of a kind of a reactive to what you've done, some of your people might get ahead of things and voice some concerns. We see that, your response time is slowing down. We see that, it's taking longer to get a PO issued. Whatever those sorts of things are, people may, as you get to know people, people are going to get ahead of things, and that's a great piece of feedback because that's a bit unsolicited. And you can also solicit it in a different way once you start to understand what that population is. But that's a great piece of information. It's kind of a forward-looking piece of information, and then you're going to get counsel from people. These are people that are going to sit down, spend a great deal of time with you, and kind of just help you brainstorm some better ideas and kind of talk about how you've been doing things and maybe what they've seen in other organizations, other boards across the country. People go off to well, at one point or another, went off to conferences, talked to people, learned some things, brought it back in. I saw this great presentation, and so from the legal department at Halton board had a really great idea. We should maybe talk about that because that's going to really help us. And those are some of the things you need to look at. So when you see feedback, I want you to see it as this wide array of different pieces of information you're going to get in. And that's really going to help you when you start to see how things go along here. So right out the gate, if there's nothing else you learned today, see feedback across these 5 major buckets. Now, before we get a little further in, I want you to understand that this whole feedback piece is kind of one segment of a broader process that's part of your kind of service excellence improvement, continuous improvement, whatever you want to call it. But the idea is that kind of at that far left side, there's that kind of concept that we're going to listen, then we're going to understand what was said, and then we're going to act on what was said. And for today's session, I want you to just focus on that top line, understanding that we're going to focus on when you're just getting into this kind of feedback game, make it as simple as possible across kind of a consistent application across all the people who interact with you. When it comes to the understand component, obviously, don't try to look at your data too often and overwhelm yourself, and don't try to slice and dice it. Just look at kind of some general results, get an idea of where you stand within in and around your client group. And then when you act on things, nice simple action plan, and focus on kind of the big 3 items. Don't again overwhelm yourself with 15 or 16 or 20 different objectives that we're going to have trouble monitoring. The idea is just start to slowly open up that kind of process of connecting feedback to service improvement, and that over time will start to get more and more sophisticated. And like I said, we're going to talk a bit more with the group tomorrow. Excuse me, about making things a little more complex, looking at things more in real time, and kind of projecting where we're going to go. So for now, just focus on simple, annual, and kind of a big 3 item. And that will help you kind of understand a bit more around how we're going to talk about service excellence and client feedback. Now, the other thing I want you to understand when we're talking about embracing this thing are the 3 major E's around the expectations people have inside and outside of your service team, the emotions inside and outside, and then the empathy once you understand what those emotions are. So when it comes to expectations, realizing nobody wants life to be messy. You want to kind of decide, we have where we are now, where we're going to go is going to be a smooth sail, and there's not going to be anything that we have to worry about. But as most of us know, welcome to 2020, the reality is a little more messy at times. And so when you set up your expectations around collecting feedback or what you expect to get from the people out there in your client group, thinking it's just going to be, sunshine and lollipops and everyone's going to give you great, happy feedback. In reality, what you're probably going to get are some pretty harsh critiques of maybe what you've done. Some things that were complete blind spots to your organization, and that's just something you have to kind of, when you set your expectations on, we're going to ask people, we're going to get great feedback, and we're going to act on it. It may not be what you think it is, and just be prepared for that when you're starting to roll out a feedback process. But moving from A to point B isn't always going to be as easy as you originally expect it to be. So just anticipate that. Please do get ahead of it. Emotions. this is where feedback is a little difficult, because most of the time people, when they're collecting feedback, they're doing it kind of in a more quantitative way. They're asking questions that are on a rating scale, and you're kind of slicing and dicing those numbers to make sure that you get kind of an average, and you can track that average over time. But what you're measuring is emotional response a lot of the time. So understanding that when you're soliciting feedback from people, and also embracing that feedback once you get it, is that you're going to get people that run the gamut in terms of that absolutely love what you do, to absolutely hate how you do things, and that's to be expected, especially the first time you roll these sorts of tools out. Is that you have no idea where people are on the map, and depending on how many people you interact with across the board, in different areas, different, levels of expectations, again, going back to expectations, their emotions when they interact with you may be very different. There may be people who love when they get, a new data set from you, and maybe people that loathe it. So just understand that these feedback tools spark emotion in people. So people like who've been kind of frustrated with your service group for, better part of a generation, finally have an opportunity to tell you in a more anonymous way, so they don't jeopardize the relationship. And this may come out of left field for you. So just understand that. But you might also have, on the flip side, people that are madly in love with you and can't wait to get another email, newsletter, whatever it is from your group. So just be prepared, again, that you're going to run the gamut of different emotions as you go along. Now, from a negative perspective, there is a predictable path, and this is where, when people talk about feedback, they they expect it to be negative, and that's not always the case. But when it is, this is just a predictable path. Nobody likes getting negative feedback, but if you get it, be aware to kind of follow this path. There's going to be a bit of pain up front. It's going to sting, especially if you have kind of verbatim comments and your name comes up in it, which can happen, and you might get angry. But the more you kind of zoom out and take an objective view of what it is people are telling you, then you can have that introspection. You can kind of get excited about the opportunity to change and improve, and then make that standardized, that your new improvement, a standard part of how your service group delivers things. And that allows you just to accept things and move on and grow from there. So just be prepared that there's a predictable path. And let me pause. If you are a manager or a team leader of within your service team, and some of your more individual contributors are getting some feedback or seeing some results reports, at some point in the future, they will go through this sort of a curve, and it's up to you to kind of anticipate that, coach them through it, and help them get from kind of that initial sting through to the growth and acceptance based on the feedback you get. So emotions are a critical piece, just like expectations. Realizing that feedback, and this is kind of speaks a bit to what I was saying a moment ago, that whatever the feedback is, that's going to impact your employee morale. So if you are more of a manager, or you yourself get feedback, you realize that morale is then going to determine maybe how you deliver your services in the future. So it can help you grow, but some people might just get upset about it and start to check out, and that's not the goal here. The whole goal is to get better feedback. Once you've had a chance to look at it, and improve employee morale, improve employees' ability to deliver more effectively. So understand that this emotional process impacts everybody, the people delivering the feedback as well as the people receiving the feedback. Now, expectations lead to emotions, emotions lead to empathy, and this is a critical component, because a lot of times when people provide feedback, it's a very personal moment for them. They are, for the first time, saying that they have an issue with how your organization has done things, or your service team has done things, and that can be a very cathartic process. Just giving you finally the frustration they've had, or they're sad that they have to say, your team can do better, and empathizing with them on the outside and again across your team is absolutely critical. So what I urge you to do, once you start to get feedback back into your service team, is to understand that the people delivering the feedback, you have to see kind of what it is their world. You have to expect believe what it is happening out in their space. You may be sitting at 50-50, ready to go, but they're at a school, as far away from you as possible, and they're internet is down, or or the boiler is blown up, or whatever it is, and they're calling you, and you have to kind of see the world from their perspective, and you have to kind of appreciate that they are human beings that need things to be able to do their jobs unbelievably effectively day in and day out. You understand their feelings, realize that if they're worked up, this may have been something that's been building up over time. And then one thing that we're going to talk a bit about right now is that once you kind of get feedback in, part of the process is relaying it back to the people who give you feedback. So communicate your understanding. I hear what you're saying. I understand that this is causing you frustration, or I'm very thrilled to hear that this delights you day in and day out. So understand that you have to see the world from their perspective and communicate back to them that you understand and appreciate what they're going through, and how your service delivery is impacting that for the better or for worse. And that's both internally and externally. So also see that inside your team, when you get some feedback results, this might hurt some people, and they have the right to feel that way, and you might be able to kind of, again, empathize with them internally as we go along here. So some really key components here around how to embrace change more effectively. Another thing that I want to make sure that we understand is that, obviously, thank you to all the more healthcare and first responder frontline workers. But my point here is that if you are leading a service team and you are more in a managerial capacity, you may have forgotten what's happening on the front lines, and understand that if your people are going into schools to deliver what it is you do, and they are face to face with the people that are dealing with your service offering, they may see the world a little bit differently, and they may experience things at a more intense level because they're staring people directly in the eyes. So make sure you empathize with those people. If you are, in an office, or you don't get out into the school environment where some of your team does, appreciate the difference. If they are on the front line dealing with people in person, or on the call center, or whatever it is, to deal with things, obviously keep that in mind, empathize with them, because they might be dealing with things that the feedback may hit them a little harder, because they're the ones trying to do their best day in and day out. We did a marketing piece to kind of promote this session, like about a month and a half ago. And one of the pieces of feedback we got, again, feedback, was that there's, a fear of burnout. So we're talking about embracing feedback and realizing that you're going to go to, a handful of the service teams already doing feedback, to hopefully all 70 doing feedback, and realizing now what's that going to do in terms of burning out our client base and over asking. The likelihood of that is very small. And I think that once each of the service teams starts to develop their feedback process and decide, who do I need feedback from and how am I going to get it from them, you're likely going to find that you're not going to be a tremendous amount of overlap. There may be people who interact with your service group once a year or a couple of times a year, whereas others are far more frequent. So you may ask at a different time point throughout the year. And my other message here is that the people out there, the rest of the board that you're serving day in and day out, they want you to be excellent at what you do. They want service excellence from each and every one of the service teams. So by them being more involved in the process, that's going to be a positive for the most part. And I want you to understand that I don't expect you to be overlapping so much so that people are going to burn out from asking questions. And also, as you continue to build your feedback journey, things will evolve. You will ask questions in different ways. You'll find people in different venues. And that will, again, continue to stratify this out to where you're not asking, I think everyone's fear is that one TDSB employee is going to be asked 70 questions every single day for the rest of the school year. And that's really not going to be the case. I think that as people interact with your service group, they're going to maybe provide feedback. And we're going to talk about that in a little while, about participation rates, and understanding that just because you ask for feedback doesn't mean you're going to get it. So that's another side, that they're not going to necessarily be burned out, but that might not be the right time. That might not be the right place for them to provide feedback. And the next time you interact, they may give you feedback at that point. So just don't be afraid of burnout. Be more cognizant about asking great questions and selling the concept that by answering or by giving you feedback, you're going to be better equipped to deliver your service. And that relationship is going to help boost engagement of people giving you feedback. And that's an absolutely fantastic thing. So just that's a quick word on that. So here's what we're going to do now. We're going to shift gears. I've been talking for about half an hour now. I'm going to push the the heavy lifting over to you all, and we're going to do our first of 2 breakouts today. And I want to kind of explain a bit about what's going to happen here. So what we're going to do is we're going to break you off into a variety of different groups. So based on how many people we have in here, we have, gosh, I think we're almost up to 76, 70 odd people, which is fantastic. We're going to break you off into groups of about 7 or 8. And once you get off into your group, I want you to please turn your microphone and camera back on. Then within your group, select a scribe. So somebody's going to take a bit of notes. We're going to talk for about 10 minutes. And what I want is the scribe to kind of either at the end of the discussion, kind of shore up, kind of the key points, or as things are said, maybe type them back into the chat. But the idea is that unfortunately, there are limitations to how Zoom works when it talks to breakouts. So to get the information back in, the best means is to use the chat function. So we're going to give you about 10 minutes to discuss the first point, and then we'll do a bit of a debrief once I have a chance to read through some of the chat key points. And so if there are questions that come up or there are things you want to talk about, now is the time to kind of start that process along. So what we're going to do, the first breakout topic is going to be around concerns. So what concerns, if any, do you and your unit team have about starting a client feedback process? So whether you think it is a useful tool or not, there may be some underlying concerns why your team or your group hasn't started yet. And the idea here is to see if there are similarities or people have had those concerns and overcome them. So when we get off into these breakouts, what I'm hoping we do is have a conversation around that. So I'm going to post the comments, that question again, in the chat feature. But the idea here is to understand that we want to understand, are there any concerns that you personally, or you've heard, or you surmise the rest of your service team to have around these sorts of things. So I'm just going to go to my breakout rooms. I'm going to give, yeah, that's perfect. I'm going to send you guys off. Have a great time. I'll see you in about 10 minutes. Oh, look at it all flying in here. No news is good news. Okay, that's 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 an absolute hallmark of why organizations stay away from it. If people aren't kind of ringing off the phone, trying to, I was gonna say the phone ringing off the wall, that would just date me and show you that I'm 1,000 years old. That that everything is great, and that has been an issue that many organizations are realizing doesn't work for them. People are sort of suffering in silence out there, and that's a big thing. The fear of the negative feedback, that is what people think it is, and that's why I'm hoping by showing you what those 5 C's of feedback are, that you'll be able to understand at a better level what there are some positives. Everything is going to be constructive. There are people that are going to say some, and I want to be very clear on this. There may be people that give you terrible feedback that are just so incensed with your service group that they are, and we're going to talk about that much later on today, but they may just say some really unfortunately nasty things, and that's part of the process. And that's why I talked about expect emotions, expect all these sorts of things, because some people are going to try to help you, and some people just don't have that in them yet, and they may be so incensed they may give you some negative feedback. Yeah, there's people that don't know what you do. So that might be another part of there's one of the groups, you're a group of a very small group. That might be an opportunity for you to realize that you need to kind of push out a bit more and ask people, do you know who we are? Do you know we even exist? That might be the feedback you ask. So if you're a member of a smaller service group, your feedback may not be, how are we doing? But if you think, gosh, we only seem to get 20% of the rest of the TDSB interacting with us when we should have 80 or 90%, perhaps asking questions around Do you even know we're here? Do you know what we do? Do you ever struggle with this issue? Because if you do, guess what? That's what we do for a living. So that might be an interesting way of kind of turning the feedback around, not on your actual service delivery, but more your people's awareness of your service group. So that's a critical piece. Um, may not be able to fix the issue. That's another major topic that comes up time and time again, that you don't want to give people provide feedback because they'll ask for things like, we wish you had this new fancy software or these new computers or um, access to this library of information, whatever it is that is incredibly costly, and it's just not going to happen due to whatever budgetary constraints and so forth. And so people say, well, I don't want to hear that over and over and over again. So that's where, again, asking the right questions, moving around those sorts of issues. It's sort of like I always say at the end of Wheel of Fortune, they give people have figured out that it's RSTLNE. And so you say, aside from these known issues, are there any other areas that we can work within to improve our ability to deliver our services to you? So acknowledging that there are some things you just cannot change, but there may be some that may not fill up the whole box. There may be some little areas where you still have some wiggle room, and asking for feedback for those particular areas at this particular time. So don't be kind of handcuffed by the thought of, we can't afford that. Say, okay, we can't afford that. Come out and say it, but tell people maybe there are some other things we can do. Maybe you can understand there might be a less expensive option. There may be a halfway step that is better than where you are today. So maybe not moving to the full suite of software, but moving to kind of a few key components and maybe bolting on over time. So that's absolutely critical things. There's generic and over-friendly response. That's another interesting point, is that people are concerned that people just kind of say yes and not help you. It is in human nature to be kind to each other, so you may get more positive than negative at times, which if you deserve it, that's great. But understand that maybe asking questions in a more targeted manner will force people to give you actual objective feedback. So those are some absolutely critical things. Don't know where to start. What are we going to put tools with? Guess what? Stay tuned. We've got another hour and 10 minutes. And we're going to talk about some of these tools. Maybe not specifically. I'm not here to promote a particular industry, company, those sorts of things, but just give you some ideas that are so easy to do, and hopefully we can help you implement some of them over the next little while. Obviously, that last piece, around union grievances. This is a tough aspect, and I don't want to derail the entire process about that. But the idea is not necessarily asking about people, but asking about the service. So separating what is being done and separating the people delivering it at times, and understanding that the idea is to build the group up. So it's a tricky game, but at the end of the day, if the goal is to make the TDS be better, then I really want people to kind of find ways to ask certain questions. So a lot of really great feedback. I'm hoping that maybe you all can kind of copy and paste this and review it for a later date, because that's going to be very important. But the service excellence team is obviously going to copy what you've said, and when they go back into coaching your various teams, they'll be able to provide good feedback, help you kind of work with some of these things. So some really great things here. These are a lot of these things, just so you know, a lot of the same concerns a lot of organizations have, but they understand that that you can remedy a lot of these things by kind of actually dipping your toe in the water of feedback, and then expanding your capabilities over time. So this is where I said right at the beginning, simple, a few questions, just get a sense, just show your people that you're trying to involve them in the conversation as things go forward. So that's absolutely some great feedback. We'll take it away and let the service excellence team look at this as they help you over the coming months as we go along here. So let's move on to the second piece here. So we've talked about embracing it. Now, to many of your points, how are we going to collect this feedback? What are we going to do to kind of get the information we need out there? The first thing I want to address is there's going to be a gap. You're right. There's going to be a difference between how you see yourself and how others see you. And on the exact same point, realizing that they have expectations and goals and hopes that you're going to deliver great things. So there's going to be a gap, perception and reality on both sides of the coin, but realizing it's up to you. It's incumbent upon you and kind of in terms of your business, your service team and your internal clients. It's determining using feedback, how big is that gap? They've done a lot of customer service surveys and research to say, for example, they intentionally leave people on hold for 30 seconds. And then they come on after 30 seconds and they ask people, how long were you on hold? And people, like, they have a clock that says 30 seconds. So the researcher would know, but people would say, oh, I've been on hold for 3 or 4 or 5 minutes. And that's where you realize that maybe managing that, saying you may be on hold for up to 30 seconds and show people, like, you've been on hold for five minutes. People see things when they're agitated, when they're emotional, their perception can be even more distorted. So using feedback helps you close that gap between perception and reality. So before we talk about collecting things, it's figuring out, you need to use tools to close that gap between how they see you and how you see what are you offering out to the group around you. So to the comment around don't even know where to start, this is overwhelming. All of a sudden you're asking for feedback. And if you pause for a second, you realize most days, get feedback in a variety of different ways. First and foremost, you look in the mirror in the morning. That's getting feedback. Do I have something stuck in my teeth? Is my hair a mess, or whatever the case may be? So you're asking for feedback. You're constantly looking for ways to get information in. So as a service group, you need to kind of calm down a bit on it and realize there's all sorts of different ways to get feedback into the group as you go along. I alluded to this way at the beginning when I talked about not everyone's going to give you feedback. This is a hard part for organizations that are just getting into this feedback game, is realizing they're going to ask 100 people to give them feedback. And the initial expectation is, we are great. They're going to want to give us feedback. So for all 100 people are going to give feedback. But study after study has shown that some forms of feedback collection are going to be more effective than others. And understanding that, even at in best case scenarios, things like in-person surveys, often hardest to do, most time consuming, even then people will not give you honest feedback or give you feedback at all. They'll turn and walk. And that's just the nature of this situation. So the burnout question is, like, you're like, most people are not going to give you feedback the first time anyway. So just calm down, and over time you'll get enough data points to use and make things better. This is also worth reminding people of, if one person says it, 1,000 people think it. So when you do get feedback, hold on to that as a really valuable nugget. And if you get enough people saying those things, even though it's a small percentage of the people you deal with day in and day out, it might be the right answer. It might be the right piece of information you need to make changes to how it is you deliver your services day in and day out. So over the course of this sort of study, there are all sorts of different ways of collecting feedback. And I've been, the Service Excellence group has already given me a list of so many of the great things that some of your colleagues are already doing to collect feedback. And it runs the gamut of most of these sorts of things, touching base with people at the end of meetings, email links to quick surveys, whatever the case may be. There are a lot of the service groups within TDSB that are already doing these sorts of things, and I'm sure they would tell you also that they're not getting 100% of the feedback they solicit. So that's another major thing. But understanding most things are low cost, most things are pretty easy to do, and realizing what the benefit of some of the things I talked about right at the beginning is that people are more and more inclined to give feedback because they do see that reward benefit to them. But understanding, again, you're not going to get 100% participation, and that's okay. Like, the more you build the case for, you give me some feedback, I give you better service, the higher the engagement level will be, but you're still never going to get 100% of response from 100% of the people. So just keep that in mind. what most people are using these days are really simple. There are so many tools around online surveys out there, whether it is a Google system. I've seen some issues here around that the Google survey may not be applicable currently, but there are many other ones similar to it. It doesn't even have to be a very structured survey. It could be just literally at the bottom of your email saying, we'd love your feedback on these 3 questions, and have people just reply to your email and send you their thoughts. And that might be a great way of starting and not getting too sophisticated around an online survey. But there are things like SurveyMonkey and other free or very low cost survey options out there if you want to get very serious about this, that have really easy user interfaces. But the idea here is that these surveys are can be very enticing to make them very long, because it's easy to do so. But the critical piece here is keep it short and simple, and again, expect not to get 100% all the way you go along here. This is something that I've seen more and more from an internal perspective, is using QR codes. So, I've talked with the service excellence group about some organizations have gone so far as that in break rooms or staff rooms, in your case, that there's a poster that literally has a number of different QR codes, quick read codes, that you can literally just hold your camera up to. It'll take you to either launch an email, it can dial a phone number, it can send you to an online survey, but it's very easy to do. So if you're working on site at a school, for example, you can generate one of these codes. Again, there are several free websites that will generate codes like this, and you can just post it. How is our work affecting your day, and have a QR code, and people can say yes or no if you're doing a renovation project, or recabling a school, or whatever the case may be. This is a very low cost, easy way of getting feedback in. And for those of you who have already held your camera up to the screen, I do apologize for rickrolling all of you. We move on to paper surveys. Anyway, paper surveys, this is again, very easy to develop. You can use Excel, put together a pretty simple template, but understand that collection could be an issue in terms of sending these out to people and getting them back in. Obviously, inter-office mail or inter-school mail may be a good use of a tool you have at your disposal to kind of collect and distribute paper surveys as you go along. One thing in the spirit of equity, however, is there are a number of AOTA, or Ontarians with Disability, concerns that people may have in terms of making sure that people are able to fill out, whether they have vision, hearing, tactile issues that they may not be able to deal with. So paper surveys may work in some cases, but do keep in mind that more and more so people are moving away from it because of an equity issue. So just do keep that in mind. Oftentimes, this is the easiest way. It's very low cost. If you task people in your service team to say, listen, we need you to spend 20 minutes a week calling 5 people you've dealt with that week. So kind of on a Friday afternoon, sit back and think, who are 5 people that I was able to impact or had interactions with over the course of the week? Now they've had a couple days to think about it. Maybe I'll give them a quick phone call and ask them 3 questions. There's going to be pros and cons here as well, in terms of, again, people are often going to be nice. So what you may be able to do is assign it to somebody else in the team, so it's not speaking to the direct person. For example, let's say you called Sally and you don't want Sally to give you the feedback on you personally, so you ask another one of your teammates to call Sally and allow Sally to kind of have a bit more anonymity on how they feel that the interaction went. So again, 396 to somebody, and you'll be able to get some great feedback. And it's a very low cost, simple. If you have a standard 3 questions you ask, phone surveys are another great one. But there are so many other tools out there, and I'll go back and realize that, again, walking out of meetings, just catching people at the end and having kind of an anecdotal conversation, randomly emailing 3 or 4 people you dealt with that week and asking them, just saying, listen, I'm trying to get some feedback back into our service group. Please answer these 3 questions. There are any number of ways of asking, and that's where, again, you'll be working with your coaches over the next couple of months to develop a process that works for you and your service group. So keep that in mind, that this is not about thou shalt use this. It's find what works, what's effective, and gets you the information you need to be effective. So I'm not going to say that there's going to be a one size fits all necessarily, but don't use something that you know will not be effective. Know your audience, know their ability to use technology or not use technology, and just be able to reach out to them in an effective way to get the information you need going forward. So once you've chosen kind of what your means of communicating with people are, there's a really key piece, which is, what are you going to ask them? How are you going to talk about these sorts of things? So I want to talk a bit about asking and developing effective questions when you start to kind of structure how you're going to collect feedback, because the key here is structure. Asking the same 3 questions to 100 people will give you some objective feedback to look at. So making sure you're asking great questions is going to be critical. So in terms of building a great feedback tool, there are some things to keep in mind. First of all, you want to ask a lot of closed-ended questions. And that's mostly because people don't have a lot of time. Ideally, in an ideal world, you can sit down for an hour, have a coffee, ask them a million questions, have all sorts of great context. But if you want to just kind of hit people for 30 seconds of their time, focus on some really targeted, closed-ended questions, yes or no, good, bad, or otherwise. Those sorts of things are very key to developing a great question set. Making sure that you keep your survey questions neutral, and I'm going to show you in a second or two about what that looks like in good and bad practice. But the idea is you want just the facts, and just to understand that if you can keep your question neutral, you're not going to bias people one way or the other. So as you read your question, sit back and say, is this pushing people to a more positive or more negative or more advantageous to us position? Because the more kind of objective you can be, the more effective your feedback tool is going to be. We're going to talk a bit about rating scales in a second, but the idea is you want to make sure that you have answer choices that allow people to say positive, negative, and to differing degrees within reason, obviously, and I'll explain that in a second. But the idea here is that you want to make sure people have the ability to give the appropriate answer to how things are working for you. Don't ask for 2 things at once. I'm going to show that in another slide. Even though I said you have 30 seconds of a person's time, don't ask questions that combine 2 or 3 different concepts, because then you're not sure what you're getting feedback on. And that happens time and time again. I get a lot of my clients will send me a question set. I'll read through it and realize, every single question has 3 or 4 points to it. So we don't know, we won't know when we administer it, what we're asking for here. So let's split those out into separate questions, and I'll explain that as we go along here. Keep your questions different from each other. People hate answering the same question over and over. In longer surveys like employee surveys or in more comprehensive surveys, you can ask 3 or 4 questions to kind of understand some of the nuances between certain concepts. But in terms of a quick feedback tool, especially as you're starting out, ask 2 or 3 or 4 questions that are very distinct from each other, so you can really kind of get a broad sense on how your service offering is working for people as you go along. And last but not least, people are busy. Don't force them into answering questions that they don't time or don't have the ability to answer at that moment. So you've likely been on to some online forums, and there's like a little red asterisk that says mandatory. When you're asking feedback of most people, keep the mandatory out of it, because people say, oh, there's 10 questions here. I only feel like answering 3 of them, because if you force them to answer all 10 and they don't feel like it, they will just not give you feedback at all. So just keep that in mind, is that this is a voluntary tool most of the time, and you can really kind of you can enhance your ability to get feedback by actually giving people more choice. So don't make everything mandatory as you're doing a lot of your feedback pieces here. So let's talk about those questions. I talked about kind of being objective, being unbiased. What would happen if this was your question? Understanding that the question written like this, you may believe that your customer service representatives are really awesome. Like, you actually might believe that, but that's your internal belief. what you're trying to get is your client group to actually validate that. And so asking this question may bias them one way or another. So making sure that you answer a far more objective question and allowing the feedback to be something that holds water at the end of the day. So if you ask that first question and you try to get funding or try to expand on something, and somebody outside of the group says, I'm not going to believe the answers here, because you push people to say you're amazing, as opposed to let people say you're amazing when they have the option of saying you're quite terrible. So be more objective when you're writing your questions and have people outside of your immediate group read them to make sure that they are far more objective. And that's another issue, in terms of leveraging your service excellence coaches going forward. So that's another big thing. We talked about asking one thing at a time. So you're thinking, gosh, I've only got like a moment to reach out to these people, and I really don't want to kind of miss that chance. So how would you rate a customer service and product reliability? Well, you might have excellent customer service and a terrible product, or vice versa. And now you're going to get a middle of the road answer, and you're not sure which one is dragging the other down. And so don't be afraid to kind of split them out into different questions, and then look at the differences and realize, great, we have wonderful customer service. We need to focus on our product's reliability. And that allows you to use feedback to make the effective change you have going forward. Once you've figured out what the questions are going to be, you need to figure out how are you going to rate these. So it could be as easy as yes or no. It could be as easy as it did or did not, or you can stratify things, and that's up to you and your service team to decide. Can we handle broad ranges, or do we literally want to know the yes versus the no's, and that's it, that's all? So we'll talk about some of these things, and primarily I have a take on rating scales, and you don't have to live and die by it, but here's my personal view. I think that many rating scales are much too large, and I often struggle with, if I'm talking about that first line on carrot cake and I'm like deciding, do I like it I'll like it a little or like it a moderate amount? That's hard to describe. A lot of organizations will use a 10-point rating scale, and I have a really tough time deciding what is the difference between a 6 and a 7. So I like to pare it down, and I think that especially when you're starting out, the narrower and more compact you can make your rating scale, if you're going to go that particular route, the better. Realizing you don't want them to be positive, very positive, extremely positive. That's, again, not an objective rating scale. You want to give people a degree of what is a positive, what is a negative score, and that way you can look at, Jim Collins wrote a great book called Good to Great, and he states in it, good is the enemy of great. So if you're looking for service excellence, you want to make sure that you're delivering things at a very positive or a very optimistic, or whatever the highest level of your rating scale is, but all the while giving people the opportunity to give you negative feedback if negative feedback is in fact warranted. So just keep that in mind as you're going through your rating scale, that there's kind of you need to be objective and give people the option to kind of give you positive when positive is due. You may have noticed in my last slide that I had like a 4-point rating scale, and I always trend to go with my clients to do a 4-point rating scale. No middle, and that's because what you're looking for is people to either give you positive praise or give you constructive feedback. And sitting in the middle doesn't help you. And I see a lot of surveys that are neither agree or disagree. That goes back to the leave your question to be voluntary. So you can have people say, it's not in the middle, skip and move on to the next one. I always see how like a lot of surveys that have maybe or something to that effect stuck in the middle of the rating scale. And that doesn't help you. You need to know, are people on board or off board with what you're doing? And the same with not sure or can't answer or whatever it is. A lot of those times, if people have interacted with you and the questions you are asking are actually relevant to that person, you should be able to get positive or negative feedback time and time again. And so I think sitting in the middle lets people and lets you off the hook more often than not. So I encourage you to kind of have the strength of conviction to say, I want good or bad. I don't want wishy-washy, and that helps you and your group as you move forward. So with that in mind, we're going to move on to the last section in a moment, but I want to kind of have one more little chat. So let you guys have a bit more of a chat around some roadblocks to change. Because the last little bit is we've talked about embracing change. We talked about embracing feedback. We talked a bit about collecting the feedback. And the last thing we're going to talk about is kind of how do we use that feedback and ultimately impact change, because that's kind of the end game here. So I'm going to push you back out into your breakout rooms, give you about 10 more minutes to have a bit of a chat as a group. Again, I'm hoping the scribes can collect some information and bring it back when we go here. But understanding, now that if you're, let's say, at 11:31 today, after today's session, you rush back into your service team and say, we're going to really do some great things here. What roadblocks do you anticipate when it comes time to really change how your unit team delivers its service based on the feedback you have received? So you're going to realize at some point, someone's going to tell you something. Now, what roadblocks do you anticipate when it comes time to change based on that feedback? So I'm going to send you back out to your groups, and hopefully we get some other great feedback here. And if you need me, I'll be back in the main room, but otherwise I'll give you about 10 minutes. Have a good time. All right, some great stuff coming back in. Yes, the power of the routine. That is one of my absolute favorite things that people realize. I've been doing it this way for 30 years. It works, and why should I change now? And that is I'm going to anticipate the number one roadblock you're going to have. Like, I've been doing this, I know how to do this. This is going to change. This is going to cause me, after 10 years of doing it this way, to now fundamentally change how I do things. So this is routines, people stuck in their rut. That's incumbent upon the people making the change. I'm going to talk about it at the end, about the idea of showing them where this could lead, how this could make their lives better. It might be some short-term pain for a lot of long-term gain, and that's an absolutely critical piece here. Sample size. Sample size is another critical one, and we'll talk about that as we kind of wrap things up here. Is realizing that, again, I think if you err on the side of one person says it, 1,000 people think it, that's one angle to look at that in terms of sample size. The other piece is, and this is, depending on what it is you offer, test it. Figure out if this is what people are saying. How can I say, okay, I'm not sure this is the whole board that feels this way. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to try this in one ward, a ward that loves us, or with people that we already love it, and see what they think about the change. And then use not only the feedback you have about the actual, the initial feedback, but also the follow-up on the testing. And I'm going to actually show you a slide in 5 minutes or so that will talk to that. But the idea is, every change doesn't have to immediately go board wide. It's that you can start it in a little place, see if it works, refine it a bit before you start to roll it out to more and more areas across the city. So that's another major thing here. Oh, you have to leave for another meeting. That's good feedback. Thanks for the feedback. Thanks for stopping by. Yes, so lack of participation by, I'm assuming we say lack of participation by team members. It's that this feedback process is happening from a very small piece of your service team, and they're the only ones who know about it. But I think that as you kind of start this feedback process, the more people you can explain that it's happening, encourage people to point feedback back to you, will kind of get them involved in the process. And I think that as the change starts to, as the need to change starts to build, you'll get more and more buy-in from people around you. So that is a good thing. Organizational policies and procedures. Welcome to the SOP binder. The whole point of a lot of this is actually changing that binder, and realizing that policies and procedures, policies obviously a little more tricky to deal with, but procedures should be easy. As new technology emerges, as new need to change emerges, that's going to be I think where you can make more of an impact is refining procedures. And at some point those procedures didn't exist, and they have a date stamp at the top. Most SOP binders, like date implemented, all those sorts of things. You can do version 2.0. That if you can build the case, people will, the board will see the benefit in changing. So I think that's it's kind of invisible handcuffs in some ways, is to say, listen, somebody developed this process in the absence of information. Now that we have information, we need to enhance it. So I think that's a critical piece here. And I keep going back to that. Yeah, change is hard. Change is hard. We are 3 weeks away from everybody changing. January 1st, everyone says, I'm going to go to the gym. I'm going to go to the gym. And you rush off to the gym. And January 1, you're on the Stairmaster doing your thing. And then you wake up January 2nd, you realize, I haven't used that muscle in like 15 years. And that hurts. And my outfit is now dirty and I didn't wash it and it laid out the night before. And next thing you know, it's February 7th. You haven't been back to the gym yet. You're going to pay every month for the whole month, for the whole year rather, and go like twice. But it's hard to establish new routines. So I think that, again, having a coach, i.e., we can call him like a personal trainer to keep that gym analogy alive, is that if you have somebody that's reminding you the benefits, and gosh, it's going to be hard until we make it part of our day to day. But if we try it once a week, or we try it with a couple of our agents, and we kind of keep moving on it, eventually it will start to solidify as the new norm. And we're going to talk about that a bit as we kind of wrap things up today as we go along here. But some great feedback for those of you who were out in the breakout rooms. Some really great feedback. I had more time to read through what you wrote about the first one, and just as great, like who will review, need time to make the changes. That's the other thing. Let me be very clear. That's another key point here. You need time. This is not going to happen overnight. You're not going to get the first piece of feedback, make a revolutionary change in like 30 seconds, and boom, like everyone, you can take the rest of the day off. That sort of thing is, it's not, feedback is a long-term process. You have to kind of zoom out, realize you're going to get feedback this year, you're going to get feedback next year. Just like a report card, you have to keep going back to some board analogies, realize, yeah, you're going to improve over time. Things are going to get harder, things are going to get easier. And as you kind of keep collecting feedback, you can make incremental change when you need to make incremental change. But if there's a major thing that you can act on, transformational, get on that and do some explosive changes. Because you have that opportunity, but don't see this as a overnight fix. Don't see this as a quick moment of change. This is again, just like going to the gym. This is an iterative process that will bring benefits if you keep it up, and that's the point I want to make here. So let's go back and wrap some of this stuff up here. So I really appreciate some of that feedback and some really good things here. But we're going to move on. We're going to move on to the last kind of section here, which is, again, before you make that change, how do you use the feedback you have? How do you get people rowing in the same direction? And remembering that you're not doing feedback for the sake of feedback. You're doing feedback for two reasons. First is obviously improving your service delivery, understanding that how, using the feedback you have to make tweaks along the way and improve overall how things are going to work for your service team is the only reason you're doing this, primarily. The other side is changing the conversation, because if your service group has a kind of a negative perception out there, by taking in more feedback, you can slowly turn that around to say, gosh, they never used to return my phone calls. Now, I can't get them off the phone. They want to help so much because they've understood the power of that phone call, or whatever the adjustment you may need to make is. But so understanding, improving how you deliver things, and then the lasting impact, which is the perception and the internal brand of your service group is critical. And that's why you're getting this feedback to continually improve and change what you have the capability to change as you go along. So let's say we're standing here a year from now. You've been collecting data using a variety of different tools. You've got this kind of mountain of information. Now what? And that's the next challenge, is kind of how do we piece all of this sort of thing together, and how do you kind of create a result report and understand that you're going to get one of two kinds of information. You're going to get kind of quantitative results like numbers and facts and figures, or you're going to get more qualitative results, so more verbatim comments and opinions and those sorts of things. So, or you might get a combination of the two, depending on how sophisticated you want to be as you push things through But the idea here is obviously the quantitative data. There's going to be a lot of data analysis. You're going to look for kind of overall averages. You're going to look for kind of what is, the distribution across your rating scales. Understanding that, you're going to have some negative people, you're going to have some optimistic people, or some positive people, whatever the rating scale you end up choosing is. But you can look at some of the data there to say the overall score, the overall average might lie. You might say 55, but you kind of can zoom back in to some of these things around the kind of the rating scale and realize, what does that curve look like? How many people are, optimistic but not very optimistic, or pessimistic but thankfully not very pessimistic, and realizing you're not going to please all the people all the time. But again, how can you grab that 63% in this case and try to push more of it into that very optimistic column? What sort of change can you make? What information can we, if they say, how optimistic you are, how can we increase their optimism based on this sort of data? So whatever the questions are, not only look at kind of whatever average you may receive, but also, look at that distribution of scores to understand kind of, are people like kind of good is the enemy of great? Are they just optimistic? How can we make them, to use an outside term, how can we make them raving fans? How can we make them just love what it is you do and actually look forward to interacting with your service group? And that's possible across all 70 of the groups. So that's critical. Looking at those averages, deciding what you can do as you go along here. I believe the Service Excellence Group has mentioned this concept before, but another really easy way of looking at things is this concept of the Net Promoter Score, and that's looking at how many people do you have on the positive side of your ledger versus people on the negative side of your ledger. And this is a really easy way to get a sense on what your Net Promoter Score is. So how high, how out of 100, what would be your score based on some of the questions you've asked. So realizing again that those passives, those people in the middle that are kind of not helping, not hurting, just kind of, sort of taking up space in your data set, but understanding how can you look at those promoters versus those detractors. We have people that love us and how many people hate us, and come up with a score that gives you a sense on how effective are we being at delivering our service as we go along. On the other side of the ledger are these things called these qualitative results. So this is where if you're collecting, you're sitting down at the end of a meeting saying, how did that go? Give me some feedback. What do you think about our new ideas? And people are just talking or typing longer winded responses. Those are great, but you have to kind of look deep into those words and decide kind of what are those comments telling us. Again, you can go back to those 5 C's and start to kind of put them in buckets. So if you have let's say an Excel spreadsheet with all of your comments in it, can you move them into these 5 buckets and get a sense of what does a healthy distribution look like? Do we have enough people that are close enough to us that can give us concerns and counsel? Are we only getting complaints and no compliments? What do our comments tell us about how we're delivering our business? So when you have comments, all you're doing is asking questions that are more comment based and comment oriented, by all means, sort them into these sort of categories. That will help you understand kind of what does the balance look like and what do we want. Obviously we're always going to have some complaints. Once you start to set that new bar, you're going to fall short, and you set the new bar, you're going to fall short, and that's part of the growth of your service excellence. This is an ongoing process over time. Another key thing is when you're asking for people to maybe give you more written questions, beware, and only from how you distribute the information. People may use proper names of people in your department. People may use profanity, and I've seen some very terrible things said in 20 years of doing this. And then be prepared for, if this is the first time you're kind of opening up the ability for people to give you feedback, my goodness, you might get some monster essays of rants. I've had some people that have come to in-person personal employee surveys I've done, for example, and they've come with an essay they've written, and they just want me to staple that essay to the survey itself, because they know this is coming, and they've been working on something to show you just how displeased or how overwhelmingly positive they are about your organization. But more often than not, those people tend to be ranting. But just be aware of this and anticipate it, and this becomes a question of how do you keep this data safe effectively? How do you make sure that it doesn't get out to everybody when it shouldn't? Those sorts of things. Just keep those things in mind if you're asking questions that people could possibly mention key people, units within your service group, whatever it is. Just be mindful of that and understand that that's going to happen, and it's how you kind of deal with that in a kind of a more effective manner. And again, using your coach will be a really a critical resource in that sort of thing. If you do use there are all sorts of online tools to do online surveys or collect feedback and that sort of thing. And many of them on their reporting function have the functionality called a word cloud. And basically that just sifts through all the information you have in terms of all the comments you have and compiles something that looks like this. Something that will show like the more mentioned words will be in much larger font. They'll be closer to the center, so you get an idea of what are some things that people are saying. So let's say you get 1,000 comments from people. You don't have time to read through all 1,000. Of something like a word cloud will make you kind of very quickly able to see some of the important messaging that people are telling you. But I do encourage you to read all 1,000 comments. That is obviously a best practice. So you kind of compiled into some sort of a results report. Now you have to kind of action that. So how do you develop your action plan? And these are things that I'm sure most of you know. And I just want to go over some of the kind of quick high level things that I want you to keep in your memory. Is that part of this feedback piece is to kind of evaluate what we're going to call your initial state. Where are you today? Remember we talked like almost the first slide. Where are you on the map? So this feedback will give you a sense of where you are on the map. And over time, working as a group or working with a coach or whatever it is, you'll be able to work on a bit of a redesign, understanding where can we maybe make some tweaks to how we do things to ultimately raise our game in terms of service excellence. Then you keep this feedback process going. This is not a one and done, is that you want to start reaching back and kind of saying, we've made some change. How is the change going over? So whether this is a small little test sample or a much larger group, but evaluate that redesign and then compare it with the initial and decide, are we making improvement or are we actually slipping the wrong direction? And more often than not, you're going to move in the right direction, but just keep in mind that this sort of cycle will repeat itself time and time again. And that's the name of the game in terms of raising your level of service delivery. I'm sure I learned this in one of the TDSB buildings, but this is an easy way of kind of deciding. Now you have your data, you have your feedback, kind of your overall results report. Now, what do you do with things? And there's all sorts of different prioritization tools out there. I use this one very often, but you're looking at kind of what's important and urgent, and deciding what do you do with things. And the idea here, surprisingly enough, is to focus a lot of your time in quadrant 2 to reduce what's happening in quadrant number 1. And understanding if you can get ahead of things with more future planning or more strategic thinking, you're going to be far more likely to have urgent, last-minute, emergencies that happen within what it is you do. So just try to look at your data and look as far forward based on what that data tells you to kind of choose what you focus on when it comes to your action plan. I believe this has also been talked to you by some of the by the Service Excellence Group, understanding that there's this plan, do, check, act. The idea is that before you even go to feedback mechanisms, that there's a certain amount of planning that goes into things to understand kind of where do we want to be, next year or in 6 months or whatever the case may be, and you kind of define what the next steps are. And then you're doing things like day in and day out based on that plan. But then it comes down to that checkbox, and that's where you realize, okay, we need to look at what we've done so far and is it working? And then you move to that last piece, that act box, and that's where you start to implement the change. If you looked and you've identified some gaps, you've identified some areas of strength that you want to leverage, or some gaps that you want to kind of shore up, you act on it. And that's the critical piece. And then based on that, you go around the cycle again. So it's this ongoing iterative process that just keeps growing and growing, but it ultimately makes your life and your clients' lives better. So if you can kind of follow that around and realize that it's going to be, make some change, measure the change, tweak the change, and just keep going around and around, things get better. That's the name of the game when it comes to service excellence and what it is you're going to be delivering for as long as you want to be delivering it, which is a great opportunity here. We talked about some of these comments about people trying to get people on board. So once you're kind of moving into that change piece, you've understood that there is a need to get better. It's how do you then kind of communicate that down to the rest of the group and outside of the smaller groups, and understanding that this is a very simple model. This is John Cotter, who's kind of the father, the organizational guru when it comes to organizational change, and he's outlined a very simple process that most people can kind of really wrap their head around to kind of creating like a three-step. He says basically you have to create the climate for change, you have to kind of make that change happen, and then how do you kind of lock it in so that it's in the DNA of your team as you go along here. So for those of you who made some comments around kind of how do we get more people involved, is that you have to kind of create this overwhelming sense of urgency, saying if we change this, our call volume will go from 1,000 calls a day to 100 calls a day, and we'll have so much more time to do more effective and more meaningful tasks day in and day out. So then you have to kind of figure out who are your loyalist soldiers to kind of help get this down into the rest of your service group. And then kind of as you follow through these last little pieces in terms of making sure people have the power to make the change, you want to make sure you establish some short-term goals so you have some short-term wins, and you just keep moving this process along. And next thing you know, you're going to be doing some great things. And the last kind of piece I want to lean on here is that as you kind of move up and kind of get more excellent in your service delivery, lock it in, make it the standard. As your quality improves, lock that as the new standard. So when you start to roll that plan, do, check, act cycle up using your feedback, you can kind of lock it in, make it the absolute standard for what it is you do, and ultimately your service group will be more successful going forward. And with that said, I've said a lot. So what I'm hoping to get is whether you want to add some questions in the chat feature. I'm going to invite Arlene to come back into the question into the meeting here. And what I want to do is figure out, are there some questions you have? So I will talk to some of the more theoretical and kind of actual feedbacky type stuff. Arlene will talk more to the more specific stuff around the actual service excellence group. So stick around for this. So please put any questions or any comments you have in the chat feature. We'll be monitoring that to get an idea of what's happening. And don't go yet, because we have some feedback for you all at the end of this. So stick around, and hopefully we will get through some important things. So if there are any comments, questions, concerns, gripes, or groans, I'd love to see them in the chat feature, and hopefully we can get to the bottom of them. Arlene, anything on top of your mind while we're waiting for some of this?
Well, I wanted to say that I actually saw some really great questions come up just in the chat after the breakout sessions. So because of time, obviously you weren't able to speak to all of those questions. So if anyone had a question that they put into the chat during those breakout session debriefings, now's a good time to check it in with Kyle.
Oh, sure. Can you talk about tomorrow's session? I don't know about the registration piece. I can allude to the fact that what we're going to do is we're going to talk about a little more sophisticated stuff. So what I'm sure, I don't know if Arlene wants to talk about other enrollment, but the thing I will caution people on, and I'm saying this just very lightly, is I don't want you to come to tomorrow's session and get overwhelmed with so many things and thinking you have to do kind of a graduate level thesis on feedback right out of the gate. So Arlene, do you want to talk about any enrollment issues?
Yeah, thanks, Kyle. So first of all, there are a lot of spaces still available. So if anyone wants to register, you can go back into Sarita sent out an email a couple of days ago. So the links are in there. So please feel free to still go in and register. And just to what you're saying, Kyle, it is next level. So it is designed to deepen your understanding. However, I know we also have teams in this session who've actually taken a stab at, getting some, starting with the client feedback tool. So if you sort of anticipate, I guess, over this cycle going into the next cycle, that you will be ready to sort of progress the work coming out of the tool, then tomorrow's session can be helpful in giving you a view of sort of what would be helpful down the road for you and your team in terms of feedback. So we encourage you, if you want that sort of longer view, and also it'll help you and your team to just start thinking about, where can we actually go with client feedback, right? So
Mm.
definitely, if you want to register, please do so.
Yeah, and like I said, like it's um, yeah, tomorrow. So I just want to make sure everyone walks before they run, and that's the only thing is that I'd rather you started, learned, iterated, got a little more comfortable with the concept before you started to kind of do some of the things we're going to talk about tomorrow. It's obviously, I'm hoping it's going to be informative tomorrow. Fingers crossed. But the idea is, I just don't want people to feel overwhelmed or feel they have to do something that is kind of next level, as per the name of of the session itself, when they haven't even started yet. So just bear in mind. That'll be good. Um, how do you increase client response coming in when it seems that, so it's more, the question I think is more around, there's initial surge and then a plateau, and then you're like, okay, now what? You're not getting the same volume. That's where I think closing the loop on a lot of these feedback pieces is realizing you've heard them and people need to know they've been heard. And I think that when you show them that you've taken the feedback, you've implemented some change, they're more likely to keep coming back to you with more feedback. I think that there's a plateau in terms of, okay, it's kind of tapered off. They don't see the change in terms of you're not announcing new improvements or getting back to them to say thank you for the feedback or whatever the case may be. So I think that's the other side. The other side, another thing to consider is over time you may want to tweak the questions as you get more savvy in what you're looking for. And we're going to talk a bit more about this tomorrow. Is you start with an initial question set, but then you start to do crazy things like targeting different groups and asking different questions, and choosing new means of getting information in. So it's just like it's like a anything. Once you start to kind of layer in and be more sophisticated and ask the right questions, more people will continue to give you feedback. So it's a great question, but I think it's realizing that you have to show them that you're making change with the feedback that they're giving you. So that's a great question. Thank you.
Can I add to that, Kyle?
Sure.
Yeah, so from a business coach perspective, one of the things that we can help your team look at, and Kyle had a great section on this earlier, is what are some other ways of actually gathering feedback? Because each team has their own specific context, right?
Mhm.
And so it's been great to see teams take on board things like the email signature. That seems to be a popular mechanism. And so if you're finding that you've set up a tool and it's not bringing in enough meaningful feedback, then that's where working with your coach, we can look at, okay, what are some other avenues that would be helpful of targeting feedback? So Kyle mentioned, does your team do in-person meetings, the phone calling, right? The emailing. So it could be shifting to adopt another type of tool in addition to what Kyle has just shared. And also, again, your business coach can look at those questions. So Kyle just suggesting maybe there's different kinds of questions. We can also do that review as well and help put another lens on the tool that you're developing.
Sure. Yes. All right. So that's just you get started in getting feedback that way. It's manageable. So somebody that a great question. Also, it's like understanding that. Let's say you're working on an 18-month project, and how do you get feedback when the project is going to last a very long time? And I'm just picking a random number. Understanding that there may be different questions along the way. Not, in this case is, for example, constructing an artificial turf field at a school. I think that there is probably some sort of a needs analysis at the beginning, but you might be initially might be concerns with noise levels and how messy is this going to be, and how disruptive would this be to my do you find this disruptive at the onset? Like are there concerns you have later on in the process? And so there's a lot of ways that you can ask, not like, do you love the new sports field? It could be, as we were going through this, to make sure that Our contractors are, maybe they can do the noisy stuff at a particular time of day, doesn't matter. And you can say what time, if we're going to be doing jackhammering, what time would be an ideal time for us to jackhammer, based on, the schedule in your school. So they can start to you can collect feedback on a project. And that's more we're going to talk about in tomorrow's session, but project specific feedback is critical. So you can say, all right, we're about to start this. What concerns do you have at the onset? So if a teacher or admin in a school is kind of like, like nervous about this monster project and realizing, okay, now what do we do with 600 kids who can't go on the field now? What do we do with them? You can allay some of those concerns at the onset of the project. And then as things go on, you can ask different questions and follow up, and then get feedback at the end. How did we do? Was this too long? You can, at the wrap up, you can ask all sorts of great questions and use that data before you go to the next site to put the new field in, or whatever it is your project is. So I hope that answers your question, Richard. Thank you. But great question.
I was just going to say that from a project perspective, you can also connect client feedback to your milestones, right? So that once the team has identified what those significant milestones are as part of their project plan, they can also identify who are the clients most impacted with each milestone. And some of that should include the project team as well, getting feedback from the project team as to how they feel the project is going, and also obviously the clients that are impacted. So that's a nice way to actually track and not lose sight of those times when, again, as Kyle just mentioned, it would be very helpful. And then the feedback can actually be embedded in the project documents, because for complex projects, there's always tracking documents, right? So you can actually bring the client feedback in, connected to those milestones, and then that allows the project team to make adjustments before they move on to the next milestone.
Yeah, but let me just kind of pause for a second. Also, obviously a great question, but you can see right already the level of sophistication of the feedback mechanism just ratchets way up. So what I want you, as the teams that have not yet even started, is to consider kind of I'll call them entry level feedback pieces, and before you get into all of the things that Arlene just finished talking about, which are obviously totally relevant. I just want to make sure that you get comfortable with the process before you start going deep into project specific timelines, project documents, all these sorts of things, as opposed to asking, like, where we park our trucks, is that okay? On more often than not, does our presence impact your school's operations? Things that it can be very basic, but so you get a sense on, okay, feedback isn't scary, before you start to realize we're about to start this monster project. We've never had any feedback before, and now we're getting feedback from all these different people, and we're pulling our hair out. So I obviously, this is where feedback goes, and I've done product launches and rebranding efforts and all sorts of different surveys for organizations that are very nuanced and different linked question sets and things like that, where if somebody responds a certain way, you can answer 7 other questions based on one response. So this can get very sophisticated and very, very helpful over time. But I want to make sure that it doesn't become intimidating right out of the gate.
Just looking at the time, Kyle.
Yes.
If we don't have any more questions, I haven't seen anything else in the chat. If there's anything you wanted to wrap up with, we could go ahead.
Sure. Yeah. No, I was just noticing that and realizing, again, there's going to be a feedback form coming out in the chat shortly. So stay tuned for that. Please do fill it out. It would be great for the Service Excellence team. Thank you all for your participation. This is a great initiative. I'm very excited about it. This is apparently going to be on YouTube, which is great. I'm going to make the slide deck available to the Service Excellence group. So I appreciate everyone who was frantically taking notes. But I'll make sure the slide deck is available. So if you need anything, you'll be able to engage the Service Excellence group, and they'll be able to provide you with a copy. And if there's any other questions, I'm sure they can help you with it or direct things to me, and that'll ultimately get back to you. So I appreciate everybody's time. I hope everyone's safe these days, and keep washing your hands, wear your masks, all those great things. Otherwise, I really do appreciate your time. And there is now the link in the chat feature. I'd like you to please take a moment, fill that out. Otherwise, you're free for the rest of the day. I'll release you back into the wild. Thanks for your participation, everybody. Bye for now.